It's always interesting, the discussion about what comes first. I read a research paper that said people who are traumatized have larger amygdalas. Oh, that's interesting. So now we scan everybody for their larger amygdala to see who will be susceptible to be traumatized. But when you know what trauma does and the amygdala is being fired all the time, the amygdala is on high alert all the time, could it be that enlarged amygdala is because it's being overworked, right? So, in Daniel Amen's book, these books are difficult. He's got pictures of people's brains on various, let's see how to do that. Oh, there we go. On various diseases. And he's got pictures of the brain, a traumatized brain. And you can clearly see that the area of the amygdala is impacted compared to a normal brain scan. But he's very clear in saying that amygdala response is a result of the trauma. The amygdala isn't the reason why the person was traumatized. And so it goes. And I'm not here to unequivocally say one way or the other tonight, because all of you guys know I'm not a doctor. But I am here to unequivocally say that with the tools and techniques we have, it's so easy to alleviate, to get somebody from a subjective unit of distress scale of 10 down to a 0 for a particular event in their life, and then see what comes after. Seems to be like a very low cost, high efficacy solution for people in chronic pain. And chronic pain being defined as pain that persists long after the natural healing process should have prohibited pain, right? So we have a whole bunch of comorbid things when the body says no. We can actually have a loss of function. The body doesn't work, or certain areas of the body doesn't work. We can have chronic pain, or we could have other emotional disorders, or we could have other physical diseases, all downstream of trauma. And that body of knowledge is growing and getting bigger and being more heavily researched. Certainly in the cancer field, at two ends of the cancer spectrum, since the 1980s, when Norman Cousins wrote his book, Anatomy of an Illness, and he identified that 80% of the people who died of cancer had an unresolved, very negative emotional event within 36 months of their passing. And they chronicled that. And he was working out of the medical center at UCLA when he did that. Deepak Chopra wrote about the same phenomenon in the early 90s. And there's been a bunch of literature written since. So there's this part of unresolved trauma can lead to cancer. And when you read Gabor Mate's book about the body, the immune system, when it's under intense stress or has been traumatized, cannot tell, what's his language? The self or the non-self, the immune system confused, right? So the immune system can go on a rampage on either side. And then in the cancer field, we know that the diagnosis of cancer can certainly be traumatizing for the person being diagnosed. And then that diagnosis ripples through their family. And some people can experience that diagnosis as traumatizing. And again, the way I work, if a person says they were traumatized, I accept that, because there is, while the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that doctors use for diagnosing things, have very clear symptoms and conditions to declare somebody has PTSD, there are no clear symptoms to declare when a person's been traumatized. That is personal. So if one of my clients says were traumatized in a particular event, I accept it, and then I clear the trauma, right? So if a person said, yeah, my aunt or my mother or my brother or some relative was diagnosed with cancer, and they say that's traumatizing, I just accept it and we clear it. I certainly know the flip side of that, though, with the, and I haven't had many, but I've had cancer clients that all of them had a traumatic event prior to the cancer flaring up, if you will, because we're all cancering, right, Tanya? We're all fighting cancer cells every day. So prior to the cancer starting to win that daily battle, they had a very, very, very serious traumatic event. I'm very fascinated as well with flu-like symptoms. People who have flu-like symptoms when they are highly stressed or traumatized. And they, Eve, all of you guys met Eve 2 weeks ago. So Eve was in today. She had COVID last week. She's through her COVID period, the 5 days for Omicron. She tested negative before she came in today, but she had flu-like symptoms. And she had flu-like symptoms, and she was also having emotional breakdowns when she tried to do her internal hard drive from step 3 of PACE. And so, my brain goes, part of her is deeply resistant to completing the task to the point where it manifests flu-like symptoms. So we found the root cause of the resistance to doing the internal hard drive. We cleared that. We cleared 2 other things. It was a great session. And I said, how are you feeling right now? She said, well, I'm a bit tired, but I feel really good. I said, no, when you came in 2 hours ago, you had the flu. You had a runny nose. You had bags under your eyes. You were feeling terrible. She said, oh my God, I feel good. I said, exactly. So, what is it that we're talking about here is such a big subject, and probably for people who like things black and white, yes or no, 0 or 1s, it's a very difficult subject to have, because there can be, it's more of just an amorphous, a big round ball of stuff that we need to know. Most people in the medical profession, I think, like to know cause and effect. Oh, you fell, you broke your arm. That's the cause of the break. We'll put a cast, it'll mend, and that'll be the new cause and the new effect. But what we're talking about here tonight is far more amorphous and therefore more difficult to put our finger on. There can't be an exact X equals Y. Not to my experience. But my presupposition is that trauma comes first. I just presuppose that. Right? Because in presupposing that, I can do no harm. If I presuppose that somebody comes into my office manifesting any symptom, if I presuppose that trauma comes first and I clear the trauma, what do I do for them? I can't make their situation any worse, because if they're traumatized, their body's already deregulating, right? Their body is already in a heightened state, running in their sympathetic nervous system to a large degree all day long. If they're hypervigilant or hyper-aware, not sleeping, anxious, all those symptomologies, well, they're in their sympathetic nervous system. So if we clear their trauma and teach them some techniques to access their parasympathetic nervous system, we can do no harm. So the presupposition that I use, that trauma comes first, can do no harm. And when we talked about the 5, Tar just corrected me today, we called it the 5 pillars of healing, but the 5 levels, if you will. The first level being the physical realm, sort of break your arm, put a cast, it heals. The second being the energetic realm. And the third being thoughts and feelings. And that with the higher up you heal, you can have downward causation. So if somebody was manifesting physical symptoms of something, chronic pain or a disease or a mental illness, and you presuppose that trauma comes first and you help them overcome that trauma, and we do it in NLP, we do it at the 3rd level of healing. We do it with thoughts and feelings. And there's downward causation. They'll experience it energetically at level 2, and they'll experience it physically. And I think those people who have cleared trauma on this call would all agree with that. And in fact, some people see a difference in the quality of their skin. When they're highly stressed, their skin isn't at its best. We clear the trauma, and a day or 2 later, or if I see them again, or 3 days later, their skin's clearing up, or somebody in their life says, wow, what have you been doing different? Did you go on a vacation? What have you been doing different? Right. And so that presupposition that we can help people by healing trauma, I think, is very safe. The other piece that we do in the way we do the trauma protocol is that we clear adverse childhood experiences. And I think that is a very powerful healing process. when we let go of the childhood things that are holding us back. And that information even in the allopathic medicine world is being really well represented, that most psychological challenges we face as adults originate in that period 0 to 7, or from adverse childhood experiences. And Gabor Mate, I was reading Gabor Mate's book before he came, and I was in, like every good book written by a sentient doctor who's very intelligent, but he admits he can't know everything. It's not possible. The book is extraordinarily heavily footnoted, right? It's just the way a good book would be written. And so go into the footnotes, and in the chapter called Self or Non-Self, the Immune System Confused, the articles, and I was reading them, and the tonality of the articles sort of to corroborate the message tonight. One here, the medical psychiatric study of patients with rheumatoid arthritis, psychosocial emotional disturbance in lupus, the differential relationships between stress and disease activity for immunologically distinct subgroups, people with rheumatoid arthritis, the role of stress and trauma in rheumatoid arthritis and systemic lupus. So these research papers exist, right? And it just goes on and on and on, especially ones where there's an autoimmune component, right? Surprisingly enough. So to the naturopaths here, this is not a news flash, but to some of us, I think it's important to know. Here's one interesting one, especially in the time of COVID, because COVID-19 had an inflammatory issue, which created a cytokine storm. It says here, the augmentation of the inflammatory reaction by activity of the central nervous system. So we know that by staying calm, staying in our parasympathetic nervous system, and in fact, by doing some of the breathing techniques that we use and teach, you can actually stimulate parts of your immune system that lower inflammation. And part of doing that's with trauma. So statistically, and by statistically, I'm telling you it's Allen's scientific wild ass guess, but I say that 80% of my clients, 100% of my clients have physical pain when they come in. They don't always put it on the table initially, but somewhere in the conversation, they'll go, and I'll ask them, where do you feel this most in your body? And they say, well, I always have a pain right here. I always have a pain back here. But because they're coming for trauma and they believe a trauma is just in the mind, that they don't need to mention that they are struggling with their body as well. So 100% of my clients have some physical manifestation of trauma, 100%, 100%. And 80%, this is the scientific wild ass guess because I haven't counted, but at least 80% leave without pain. All right. And the 20% who leave with pain, I would suggest either have traumas that we haven't revealed yet, or they have something seriously wrong that they should seek medical expertise in. Like something's not right. Because again, the sweet spot of NLP is in learned behavior. Trauma is a learned behavior. But if somebody was traumatized, both physically and emotionally, say in an accident, and they come in with chronic pain, and we alleviate a big chunk of the chronic pain, but some remains, then I would suggest that there may be something physically still not healed. That would be my suggestion. What Dave Baker, one of my clients, came in. This is one of the most crazy stories I'd ever heard. So you guys are going to clear the screen after I tell the story, but he was sitting in a Life Labs at 63 years old, waiting to give blood, to have blood work done. And a car crashed through the window of the Life Labs office, pushed him into the receptionist's desk, killed the receptionist, and he woke up 4 weeks later on one of those funky beds in the hospital that keeps moving because he was in a coma for 4 weeks. And when he woke up, they said, you're probably not going to live and you'll never walk again. And I met him at 67. One of our clients and friends who's a registered physiotherapist had worked with him. And she had worked with him for 2 years, and he was diligent getting his health back, walking, recuperating, doing everything. And she got him as far as she could. Like all the pieces were back where they were good. And he was still in chronic pain and still had some issues. And she said, well, you need to go see Allen. So he came to me and I did a PACE breakthrough or a trauma breakthrough with him. And it was quite profound because he had this searing pain down his left leg. And that was every day at an 8, 9, or 10, and he was medicating for it. And one of his physical behaviors that we were successful was that he'd be able to get on an airplane and go for an airplane trip, because with this pain, he couldn't sit any length of time on an airplane. And so at the end of the breakthrough, his daily pain was 0.5 to 1. That's where he was. The beginning of the breakthrough was 8, 9, or 10, heavily medicated, and he was at a 0 to 1. And interestingly enough, his diabetes had spiked way up. His diabetes had become out of control after his accident. And after the breakthrough, one of his behavioral goals was to get his, a naturopath help me. AC1, is that AC1? Is that one of the diabetes measurements?
A1C.
Oh, I was close. A1C. A1C. And he wanted to get it below 6. I remember the number. And over the course of the breakthrough at the final check-in, he was under 6. And he booked a holiday. His relatives lived in England. He booked a 2-week holiday in England and went hiking. Went hiking with his relatives. This is a 67-year-old who woke up out of a coma, told he wasn't going to live or walk. So, the allopathic medicine did their part, saving his life. And then we did our part, healing the trauma and allowing and relieving the chronic pain, that pain which should have been alleviated naturally in the course of his healing, right? And so tonight, that's what I wanted to talk about, was that, we cleared trauma, but when you look at people in your life who have chronic pain or who are having anxiety or depression, I mean, the connection between anxiety and depression and trauma is almost bulletproof. It's almost an equal sign. That unresolved trauma, you're going to get there. Because imagine you wake up every day with your amygdala on high alert, yet you lack the energy to work out. Most people who have trauma don't go to the gym anymore. So now your exercise is going down and you're not flooding your body with endorphins. You become reclusive. So now you're not getting any social interaction. So you're not getting the chemistry, the neurotransmitters from the interaction with other humans. And it's not a long ride from there to depression and or anxiety where I've got trauma today. I'm not working. I can't work. You start worrying about tomorrow. And then every time you bring up yesterday, you get depressed. So that is almost an equal sign in a lot of research. It was interesting as I prepared for tonight, there was one medical survey that went out in the States. Here's 20 things some people with trauma did as a physical manifestation, directly connected as a byproduct of unresolved trauma. One person, scratching myself until I'm raw. It happens when the flashback starts and I can't snap myself out of it. So just ripping and tearing at their own skin. If anyone starts yelling, I end up uncontrollably crying, even if the person isn't yelling at me, just if they're yelling in a negative way in general. I usually have to leave before it turns into an anxiety attack. I binge eat. It's a coping mechanism. Food was manipulated for a while in my household and was often something that would be taken away if anything bad happened, which was a lot. So whenever I'm stressed or having a breakdown, most of the time I binge eat. They can't take food away from me now, but I'm scared they still will, right? So an eating disorder. When Sam was here, Sam and I talked, and I think we'll still do it. Look at somehow running a pilot where we treat 20 people with an eating disorder using the trauma intervention and see where we get to. Just see where we get to. Because we can do no harm, right? But I'm guessing that everybody with an eating disorder has been traumatized. If we do a timeline scan, we'll find trauma in their past. Number 4, I stress sweat, especially if I'm surrounded by strangers. I even stress sweat in my sleep, which leaves my sheets drenched. It's gross and I hate it. When I'm stressed from overtime at work. I have diarrhea every Friday evening for several hours. Then it goes away until the following Friday evening. Never at work, only when I reach home, regardless of what I eat. One of my clients, when they met me, they had irritable bowel syndrome uncontrollably. When we cleared the trauma, they didn't anymore. They did not. You know, what I put on my website that we can heal irritable bowel syndrome, not a chance. But as a byproduct of healing the trauma, yeah, I'll take that as a win. When I'm very stressed, I start scratching my head, often bloody, bite my fingers, my lips. I try to calm down by tapping on my sternum heavily with my fingertips. It really helps me relax because I feel it through my bones. It hurts a little and lets me snap out of my scratching. I wonder how hard that person's hitting their sternum, right? Probably hear them across the room. Muscle armoring. I don't know what that means. Muscle armoring due to PTSD. I haven't been able to relax my shoulders for 10 years, not even when I'm visiting a chiropractor and get a massage once a week. Most of my body is tense all the time. I've got support products for my neck, shoulder, hands, and wrists that are supposed to reflect body heat back to the body, but my body is so tense, I don't get much relief. Selective mutism. When my brain gets too overloaded, one of the first things to shut down is my ability to speak. Right? So I wonder how many people in society get into a corporate setting and they literally have mutism. Right? And that happened to me in Parkland, Florida. After the Parkland, Florida shootings, I was down doing workshops and we were going live on stage to do a live demo with a school teacher. And we were in backstage and I said, are you ready to go? And she went, I said, what's going on? She just pointed to her mouth and shook her head. I said, can you speak? She went. So before we went out on stage to clear her trauma, I had to clear the trauma that came in early childhood that led to the mutism in that moment. Right. And then we went out on stage and did the Parkland shooting trauma for her. And she was a school teacher who let one of her students go to the washroom just before the shooting started. And the child came back to the door and knocked on the classroom door to get back in. And the standard operating procedure is you don't let the child back in because the shooter might be with them. And she said, you know, here I am with 30 kids in the room and an 8-year-old looking, you know, on the other side of the door. I know I can. And she said, I let her in. It wasn't minutes later, the shooter was actually in the alcove of her classroom, right at her doorway, right? And so just the thought of how bad and pear-shaped that could have went traumatized her severely. So we cleared that one on stage. Memory loss. So long-term memory loss, but also short-term memory loss. I can't remember much before the age of 10 now. Trauma happened at 21. When I was teaching down in the States, you know, because we run a movie theater where people are playing literally a memory movie, a movie memory, psychiatrists and psychologists would ask me, they'd say, well, some of my clients have no memories. I'd say, well, let's clear the trauma and see what shows up. And so we taught a course I guess 4 weeks ago, right, Carrie, the PACE course. And there was a participant on PACE who had no timeline for a big part of her early timeline. We cleared the trauma. All of a sudden, her timeline started lighting up. All the memories were there. The trauma had just repressed it all so deeply, so far away, sort of put a concrete pad over it to save her. I'll be walking around downtown or talking to friends or driving to work, and all of a sudden, I start gagging really hard, right? I wonder if it's my body trying to purge toxic emotion, memories, trauma from itself. Uncontrollable. Public places make me extremely anxious and I flinch or tense up whenever a man walks near me. So when I'm anxious, I have this weird tic where I just repeatedly breathe in quick and shoulders jump like somebody's going to hit me. It's really embarrassing to me because when I'm with someone and this happens, they think I'm doing something weird. Yeah, that's got to be tough in public. When I get too stressed for a long period of time, I have the most excruciating stomach pain. I usually end up being hospitalized. I was once in there for 5 days on an IV. My doctor said it's connected to my PTSD. So unfortunately, there's no way to avoid it. That's what her doctor said. Thank you very much. I lost my appetite. Usually it happened right after or before a meal. I'd feel sick and couldn't even imagine eating. Later, once the initial shock and hurt passed, I would binge hard. I get periods of sensory issues. They can last hours or months. By sensory issues, I mean it feels like every sense is far away or I'm trapped in a fog. Then I'm instant. Everything is super overwhelming. Clothes are irritating. Everything becomes too loud, too bright. It switches between all or nothing multiple times a day. That's a wild ride. Migraines. I get nasty migraines. Seizures. If I get too revved up after thinking about the trauma, I can have seizures similar to panic attacks, but look exactly like an epileptic seizure. I've been diagnosed with PTSD and conversion disorder. Avoiding and finding healthier ways to deal with my triggers is a huge step to my recovery. Insomnia. When I feel unsafe, I can't sleep. I get brain zaps sometimes because my subconscious mind is trying to dissociate it, but I'm fighting it off with conscious thoughts. It's like there's someone in my brain whacking my head with a frying pan so hard, it makes my eyes rattle. This person says, I repeat words a lot when I have flashbacks or anxiety spikes. Sometimes it's just a normal word like so, or and, or sometimes it's just like a repeat downgrading phrases like, I hate myself, I hate myself, I hate myself. I never did that before the assault that gave me trauma. I think it's a form of coping. Whenever someone shouts near me or there's tension in a room or around me, I start to fall into a panic attack and my face starts twitching. Right? Started after I was traumatized. So there you go. Some weird not weird, I guess, unique manifestations of post-traumatic stress that are unresolved. But all 20 of those would just be miserable to live with, right? Miserable to live with. And so there's just a lot of material out there about it. It's easy to find. If you just Google in comorbid illness, comorbid disease, or comorbid disorders following on trauma, you'll get filled with research papers. And the key is that post-traumatic stress disorder, one of the keys is post-traumatic stress disorder is a follow-on disorder to being traumatized. If you don't resolve your traumatized, you might get PTSD. And so many people think they're synonymous. They are not. They are not. The disorder that's diagnosable has symptoms. And many people who are traumatized don't have that full range of symptoms, yet they are traumatized and it's debilitating and it's manifesting differently. So tonight I invited Danielle to join us. Not that she had to be invited because she's part of Inspired Outcomes and because we're here, she's here. But Danielle, for you guys, she was on the first episode with us. And, her story is that I met her at a public event. And when she heard what I did, she reached out and said, I'd like to talk to you. I think I've been traumatized. Like I know I've been traumatized. And so we went to work together. Right. And Danielle is that classic client who the system has failed her. She'd been years in various therapies and she can explain to you that process, but she also had massive chronic pain up to the point where it was diagnosed. So, without telling the whole story, I'll just ask Danielle to put on her mic and tell us about the journey into trauma and the emergence of this chronic pain and the diagnosis of it and where you are now, if that would be okay.
Yeah, sure. So I just wanted to start, I pulled these out because I thought this was kind of funny. I pulled out all my therapy workbook. So this is trauma-informed DBT. This is some cognitive behavioral therapy. Not as big. This is another just DBT workbook that I did, 3-month program, something like that. Here's the last DBT one I did. And then pain control and wellness group. This was the second last therapy I did before going for NLP. And I would say that there's at least $3,000 worth of therapy in this huge pile that didn't ever help me with my chronic pain, except for the pain group, didn't address it at all. And even the pain group was more just like coping. And I was able to manage better, but the pain didn't go away. I relabeled it as like, oh, I'm not having pain. I'm just having a burning sensation right now that's making it really difficult to walk. Things more along those lines. But I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. I also do have some scoliosis and a few issues that are remaining. Now that the fibromyalgia is just 99.9% disappeared, I can actually focus on what's really going on and not be bogged down by that or held back by that. Now, if I have a pain, I know it's something's up. I've had like the odd 10 seconds or so of fibromyalgia at times of stress. Like I lost my grandmother, and there's like a couple of times where I went, oh, my feet hurt, and then they didn't hurt anymore. It was like a brief moment.
The pain you
So
were
I know-
in, the pain you were in, how, give us a semblance of how high it was.
Well, I was on disability for it before. Like it was really difficult. Like I wouldn't know I had a good day until the end of the day, but I was at like 8s and 9s. When I would get my period, it amplified that pain so much. And I have some other problems, but I was having seizures with my period. It was so horrendous. I couldn't function. And then all the emotions around it. That was the other thing. It was very upsetting to be in pain for me. And then when I was upset, the pain would come as well. So then it didn't matter what happened first.
Danielle was using a walker some days. That's how bad the pain was.
I'm 38 now. I would have been like in my mid 30s when I used a walker, and even I've used a wheelchair at times, usually with my having my period. But that's how bad it was. Issues with my nerves, my joints would be stiff, just general pain, bunch of digestive issues. Like I started writing some things down when Allen was talking and saying those quotes. Like I used to sweat like crazy too. Something would set me off, and for 2 weeks I would just sweat. Didn't matter deodorant, didn't matter anything like that. And I recently had to appear in court, and for the first time after I realized I didn't sweat. Like not like before, like a little bit, but not like where I'm like, okay, my shirt is soaked. Like I have pictures with like huge sweat stains after court from like 6 months ago. And for that kind of pain, meds only really gave me side effects and didn't often help. So they just kind of made the problem worse. There was nothing I could really do for it. Like at one point in my life, my kneecap was dislocating. So I can put on a knee brace and I can go for physiotherapy and I could go for treatments. Like there's a reason for the pain and I can do something about it. But fibromyalgia, it's like, I have no idea why this is happening and I have no idea what to do about it. That was terrible. And a bunch of digestive issues as well in there. I would go into cyclical vomiting. At times, if I got going, I had a period where I had chronic hiccups and like literally was losing my mind. Everyday hiccups. They were very painful too, because like after a while, you just feel like you're bruised. And I would deal with hiccups every day almost. You know, the odd day I'd get through, or littlest things, I'd be like turned to the side a little bit and I'd swallow and I get the hiccups. I'm like, what? And what can you do? The doctors didn't know anything to do for me. And I'd go into cyclical vomiting and have hiccups at the same time. And I'd just be spent. I'd just be ruined after episodes like that. Like it would take me so long to recover. And then getting a terrible period every month, it was like this just endless. I was in regular pain on a regular basis and then having like a pain crisis every 3 to 4 weeks. And I just kind of lost lost any kind of resilience to deal with it, to be like, oh, I can power through this. It's like, no, I can't anymore. I'm all out of powering through this, and I would just give up. And now I notice when I do have pain, like if I stub my toe, or like right now I've got a sty on my eye that's bothering me, I'm not getting upset about it. Like I'm not crying about it. I'm annoyed with it at times. So I'm not having these unwarranted emotional outbursts because I'm in pain. I have, I think just because so much of it's been relieved that I can handle the amounts now when I'm having it, but it's like totally different experience. And another thing I noticed is, I have like some issues with my shoulders being forward because I would like literally like sleep like this, like curled up in a ball for years. And I like hardened up in that position. And so when anyone would try to work on my shoulders or even other spots in my body, it would release traumatic memories, be super re-traumatizing, or I'd just get really mad and not have any idea why I was so mad. And now when something happens and I've been able to do things for myself and something releases, I'm like, oh, I can feel relief instead of these traumatic memories coming in and haunting
That's
me.
such an important, it's such an important thing you just said, because the literature is very clear that our body creates a record of the stressful or traumatizing events. And so the very act of seeking relief through massage or some form of physiotherapy was actually triggering the memories in you, right? And so now you're in a vicious loop. And of course, when you're traumatized, there's no beginning, middle, or end. It's continuous, right? It's a spin.
Yeah, it was like every third or fourth session I'd have, something would get triggered. So, but I had to go because I was in so much pain. Like I was crippled. I had to go for physio. I had to go and get treatments done, or else I wasn't really mobile at the time.
So
yeah,
how many years were you off work?
Well, I don't think I never really worked a full-time job after university. I just never did, but fully
You
off.
do now.
Fully off of work. I would say I left my last job in 2015.
Wow.
Yeah.
You think about the economic cost, the personal cost to people like Danielle is extraordinary and it's not acceptable. But then when you look societally, the cost on our healthcare system, right? We've got the most expensive healthcare per capita system, comparable to the United States in the world. And when you start listing the things, when that list that Danielle just gave us, all of that would have been treated pharmacologically with repetitive doctor visits for a period of, you're 38 now. So you left university at 24, 23, 24?
I started university at 24.
Okay.
I was about 30 when I graduated.
Okay. Yeah. So it's still an 8-year journey, right? And the system is designed not to get her back to work. And in fact, the system gave her incentives to stay at home at some level.
The doctors had offered me muscle relaxants at some point, and when I was in school, and I was like, okay, but like, can I go to school on these? Like, am I gonna be able to do my homework and stuff? They're like, well, not, probably not. I'm like, how does that help me? And one of the diagnoses I had also was called somatic symptom disorder. And it's just, if you look it up, it's just so terrible because the symptoms are things like books too many doctor's appointments, and like it was just so bizarre, like to look at it, and it like believes they have an underlying cause of their problems. It's like, well, yeah, something's causing this. And it was just like such a slap in the face to get diagnosed with that and then look up what it was. And basically it's like I was saying, with the emotions and the physical pain being enmeshed together.
I think, and when you and I first started working, Danielle lives about probably a good hour and a half from where we are located. And the drive was very tense for her because she wasn't very comfortable driving. Right. And I remember partway through the breakthrough where the drive was relaxing, we were talking about what's changed for her and said, well, I'm not totally happy driving, but I'm not all tensed up the whole way. Right. Which is kind of a huge win, being able to drive.
Yeah, for sure. It was just, like I said, like it was both the things and they would just feed off of each other. So I'm a little bit more upset. Now I have more pain. Now I'm more upset. Now I have more pain. Now I'm more upset. Now I have more pain. And it would just kind of keep going and going, and nothing offered me. I'm actually lucky that I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, because it was a way for me to stay off of meds, because it's known that in fibromyalgia, people experience more side effects. So when they would offer me medications, which always just made me feel worse in some way, or it was just exchanging one problem for another, I was able to say, well, like I can't really risk trying that because of the fibromyalgia. I'm more subject to these kind of side effects, and like I don't want to do that. I was actually able to get into group. That's what got me into group therapy, because they just really want to send you to a psychiatric nurse practitioner and put you on some kind of medication. I've been offered, the one I was offered, I don't recall what it was, but it was a combination of antidepressant and painkiller. And I was like, whoa, how addictive is that? Like, how does anyone ever come off of that? And they're like, oh, you'll be on it for about 6 months. And I looked it up, and it's like, no, people have such a hard time coming off of that drug. And I just had no interest in it, because I knew that I wasn't deficient in a pharmaceutical. It wasn't like, oh, they took my blood work and be like, oh, you're deficient in pharmaceuticals. Here's some pharmaceuticals. I knew that wasn't the problem, so I knew that wasn't really the solution.
The naturopaths are smiling. Yeah, there's a blood test to find that you're deficient in Zoloft.
Yeah, exactly.
You're deficient in Zoloft, vitamin Zoloft. You need more. So, last week we had a pretty stressful week at Inspired Outcomes. Danielle found us a grant to apply for Monday morning. So Monday we said, okay, let's get going. The grant application was due Friday at 3:00. And it's a large grant. So, plus we still coach, and plus we still run the Abundant Coach, and plus we still do training, and plus. So Monday night I said, okay, I'm going to work late. And some of you guys know this story already. I went out and grabbed a burrito, came back in the office, was in the kitchen in the office eating, and some less than admirable gentleman came in the office and stole my laptop. So, Monday night I couldn't work late, and I had to wait till they caught the bugger on Thursday and got my laptop back. So I got my laptop back about 1:00 on Thursday afternoon. So now we're a day and a half behind on this really imminent. So by Friday, I would argue that you guys know I'm intense anyway. So by Friday, we are full steam ahead. There was I think I went to bed at 2 a.m. and woke up at 5 and Friday morning and just push to full speed. And Danielle didn't cave into that pressure, and that's that. When was the last time you wrote a government proposal of that size, Danielle? Ever?
No.
No. And a lot of it was, I'd never seen some of the structure of this. It was a federal government one, and I'm a little bit away from 4 or 5, 6, 7 years away from writing proposals. So, there's a learning curve for all of us, and you don't want to we probably collectively, you and I probably put 40 or 50 hours into that in a very short period of time. So you want to get it right. Right. So yeah. But the point I'm making is, Danielle, I don't know, did you have physical pain last week? Or
No.
No.
Once we had finished and you said you were going to go to your office, I put my head down for about 15 minutes and just, I think, coming down off of just pushing through to get that deadline in.
It's exactly what I did. I went to my office and sat in a chair and put my feet up for 15 minutes. I mean, that was literally, we pressed send on the hour, or 2 minutes after the hour, actually, and they accepted it. So we went right to the finish line to get it done. There was no backing down. Just eat and drink coffee and go. And again, the point I'm making is, though, normally if we had tried to do that a year ago or 6 months ago, what would have happened?
No, I wouldn't have been capable. Something would have given out, or who knows, just the stress, I would have been upset too, and just in too much
Yeah.
pain to
Yeah.
deal with it. Like when you can't walk, or like I had really bad sciatica, like terrible chronic sciatica. And yeah, I have to do my stretches and things, but I could tell it was being set off by stress
Yeah.
and tension, that I just don't I'm not accumulating it like I used to. It can come in and go out, and I'm not just like hanging on to every bit of tension that comes my way.
So we're going to question and answer in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to wrap this up, put a bow on it. You know, one of my first clients, a friend of mine is in Sudbury. She's a Psych D, and she's also an NLP trainer. And her daughter was diagnosed, by the time she was 15, she'd been diagnosed with anxiety, general anxiety disorder, depression, OCD, PTSD, and an eating disorder. I forget which eating disorder she had. 5 diagnoses by the time she was 15. Just the impact of that messaging on the human spirit had to be debilitating, had to be horrible. And so my friend in Sudbury said, can you come up and I'm pretty sure my daughter's been traumatized. Can you come up and work with my daughter? So I drove to Sudbury and I worked with her. And right now, that young girl, you know, it wasn't a one and done type of thing. First, let me say that. But when I finished the trauma model, I did the trauma model in 2 days with her up there. Her eating disorder, her and I went to a local health food store, and we had shakes and protein balls. And like she was anorexic. At one point, she was down to like 92 pounds and in the hospital. So there we were sitting in this health food store eating milkshakes, protein shakes and protein balls. And she was quite happy to do it. And she's quite healthy today. So I started this conversation, and you guys know I'm pretty fearless with the trauma model, not because I think it's the end all and be all, but I think it can do no harm. And the number of people I've seen give massive amounts of benefit to. And the chronic pain manifests in all sorts of ways. Like I know lots of people who have chest pain or shoulder pain. I know lots of people. In fact, one woman I dealt with last summer was off her job on short-term disability. Her goal was to get out of bed and get dressed when I met her. This is a middle manager at a city level, and her goal was to get out. She had inflammation in her brain, which she had relieved. She had a fairly significant scar. And just prior to meeting her, the pressure was building in her head again, and they were going to operate again. She was also looking at getting what do they call it? It's like an acupressure machine that you touch and it sends a little charge through your body. I don't know what kind of machine it is. It was about $700. She showed me the brochure and I said, why don't you just wait until we finish the trauma model before you buy that machine? I said, it looks like an interesting machine, but why don't we wait? The long and the short of it was, during the first 4-week break, her daughter's mother-in-law to be passed away. And during that week, her daughter was pregnant at about 14 weeks, 15 weeks, and she lost the baby. So her daughter lost her baby, and her daughter's in-law to be, her mother-in-law to be, passed away. And she dealt with that, didn't succumb, didn't go to bed, didn't hide, didn't get pressure in her head. And all summer they were up at their summer property up on the Great Lakes. She's back at work. She's active. I hadn't seen her for a while. I bumped into her in a pet food store just before Christmas. She was bubbling. I said, did you ever go for the operation? She said, I don't need to. I don't have that pressure in my head anymore. All right. So I don't advertise that we heal all these things. What I'm telling you guys in this room is that my experience of working with lots of people, hundreds, is that a lot of the other symptomology goes away. Not all of it. I would never say that. Anxious people are more challenging. People who have got very advanced anxiety, people who've got very advanced anxiety take longer. I've got a sex trade worker who I'm working with right now, who's been using drugs and been in the trade for 20 years. And she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which I don't like labels, but she's more challenging than a straight trauma clearing. I'll just say it straight up. I think for a lot of people, in fact, I say it for myself, like she's right at the edge of my scope of practice or slightly outside it, right? But I'm not giving up on her yet. I think she's had so much trauma in her life, and the impact of being in that trade, the self-esteem, and then the drug use and all those other things. It's not simple, but she's made great progress. And I think she'll continue to make great progress, right? And Milton Erickson said it best. He said, that the single biggest factor in your client's healing is the clinician's belief that the client will heal, right? And I believe the work we do is so powerful that it has such massive effect that, there's quite a few people who have cleared trauma on this call right here, and the power of it.